and I'm very, very excited to see all the people from the early morning over here in New York to all the way to Indonesia. I've seen India, a lot of different countries in Africa, Latin America, and Brazil is here too. Yes, thank you, Carolina. My name is Anna Felt. I'm going to moderate the session today. I'm very excited for this session. It's been long overdue. This is a topic that we have been inspired to, we have integrated into many of our different discussions, but here's a dedicated session to this very, very important topic. It's a part of a series of webinars that we do as part of the We Empower G7 program, which we are implementing with the support of the European Union and in collaboration with ILO. So we're also very excited to have Marinaki here from representing the European Union. And we have, for those that are attending our regular webinars, this is the third one this week. We focus on different topics related to women's economic empowerment and specifically to support companies to implement the women's empowerment principles. So today we will start with some opening remarks from Ambassador Marinaki from the European Union. And then we will go into a fireside chat. And Mara, if you'd like to join, you're of course always welcome to join the conversation. But we have Anita Bhatia from UN Women, Irina Natividad from the Global Summit of Women, and Sama Mazloum from MasterCard. And then we will talk a little bit about the guidance note that we have worked with different partners to develop concrete guidance on how to build inclusive boards to achieve gender equality. And then we'll wrap up with also a few polls. And hopefully you will have received a lot of information and that you will ponder over the weekend. Ambassador Marinaki, I will give you the floor and to give some opening remarks. Over to you.
Thank you, Anna, and I hope you can hear me.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A very warm good afternoon from Brussels, good morning, good evening to all the colleagues joining this session. It is really impressive to have such a large number of interested participants, and it only highlights how important it is for all of us to stay on top of the latest developments and adapt and adjust our policies to reflect these urgencies. Now, we have 25 years that have elapsed since 1995 and the Beijing Platform for Action, and we are fully aware that women are still struggling despite all the capabilities and educational achievements against systemic barriers to access to corporate boards, to leadership positions, and this is due to unconscious bias among many other misperceptions. And we're also very well aware that women's untapped and underutilized potential in all our societies, putting aside 50% of our capacity, is a luxury that we cannot afford. So politically as well as economically and socially, and especially after the COVID pandemic, the new grim realities in our working world. So we need to start afresh. We need to have more effective policies in place, and to make a real impact, we also need first to do our homework and start with the statistics to study. According to the most recent figures from the European Institute for Gender Equality, women still make up less than 30% of the board members and only 8% of the CEOs of the largest listed companies in the European Union. And figures also show that the impact of legislative action is striking. Since 2010, the countries that have taken legislative action have seen a rise of 27 plus 5 percentage points. And this results in 36.5% of women on boards. Women that have implemented non-regulatory measures, they have seen a rise of only 14.3%, that is 28% of women in the on the boards. And countries that have taken no action have seen no progress. So this means that voluntary measures are not as powerful as binding commitments. And we should also take a paradigm from the respective numbers in politics, where we have also quantitative versus qualitative representation of women, with proportion of women in national parliaments across the EU countries an all-time high of 32%, but still 2/3 are men, and only 1 in 5 of the major political parties in the European Union has a woman leader. So this means that there is still a long way to go. Of course, we observe a better improvement in countries that have imposed quotas, and a case in point, besides the obvious candidates, as it is the case with Sweden or Finland or Iceland, let me refer to Belgium. Belgium has managed for the first time ever to form a government after almost 2 years, 2 weeks ago, which is for the first time 50% women, 50% men ministers, a major achievement. And this shows the way that we need to take a more holistic context in our policy efforts. We need policies to increase the employment rate of women. We need to reduce the gender pay gap. We need to tackle the gender segregation in education and in employment, and uproot non-transparent nomination and promotion schemes that are still very much prevalent, both in the political and in the corporate environment. And of course, what we need to promote is more friendly family policies to help provide work-life balance. We need to support the equal distribution of caring and domestic responsibilities. We need to improve the reconciliation of work and family life for both women and men, and help overcome the gender stereotypes. Such measures should aim to eliminate the individual, the organizational, and the social obstacles to women's representation in leadership positions, both in the public and the private sector, and of course in all other areas. And we aim for diversity to continue, because diversity is our strength. We can only reach our full potential as societies if we use all our talents and diversity in business, in politics, and in our society as a whole. Researchers have shown that women among the top decision makers in legislatures have lower levels of income inequality, and the greater share of women as cabinet ministers exhibit also greater levels of confidence in their own national governments. When women hold executive leadership positions, their companies are more profitable. And also, companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams are 21% more likely to outperform the national average. During these last months in particular, and due to the pandemic from COVID, we have had a tangible demonstration of women's full capacity in the front lines of healthcare and medical services to lead an effective response against this pandemic, while they also have paid a very heavy price through the exponential increase in cases of all forms of violence against them, including large numbers of cases and victims of domestic violence. To tackle the pandemic, therefore, we must include women at all stages in the decisions for the response and recovery to COVID. And this is not just a global health crisis, it is a political, economic, humanitarian, and development crisis affecting all our societies and all our economies. Now, private sector, it holds a crucial role to play in this context through advancing women's empowerment and especially women's economic empowerment. Against this backdrop, I would like to present the EU policies on gender equality and women's empowerment and how we can engage further. We're aware of the fact that the European Union is among the global leaders on gender equality. Nevertheless, and despite the fact that 14 of our member states are among the top 20 countries worldwide on gender equality, yet none of them has the potential by 2030 to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 5. None of them. And this is a reason for worry to all of us. We have already adopted in March the gender equality strategy that promotes a more gender equal Europe through society, and it urges also for better progress on women's leadership. But the important litmus test for us, for me, but also for many of us in the European Union, is to overcome a symbolic and decisive hurdle with the gender pay gap. Overall, in the European Union, there is still a 16% pay gap, but there are great disparities among the 27 member states. Without any action, the European Union as it stands, the gender pay gap overall will not end until 2104. And this means that some of the member states will take even longer. Germany would have to wait until 2121, while Belgium, that we already mentioned, would be almost there in 2028. And Hungary would have to wait until 2102, just to name some indicative member states. And others are close nearby. And of course, this is partly due to the fact that women take a bigger share of unpaid domestic and care responsibilities, much larger than men, mostly due to social norms. And this influences their career patterns and also their time spent outside of the job market, but also their choice, quote unquote, for the sector that they would go for. So what we need to do when we feel the urgency is to take action on pay transparency, and this before the end of the year. And our discussion today could not be more timely, as yesterday there was a major political gesture in this direction. There was a letter sent from the European Parliament that was addressed to Chancellor Angela Merkel as the current President of the Council of the European Union, with a request to revive the initiative on the women quota and push for the proposal on women on boards, which establishes a goal of 40% of non-executive board members of listed companies being of the underrepresented sex. The directive was originally proposed already in 2012 by then Justice Commissioner Viviane Reding. Now she is also a member of the European Parliament. And at that time, the current president of the Commission, Ms. Ursula von der Leyen, was the German Labour Minister. Time has passed and nothing has happened. The letter was signed by the presidents of the 5 political groups and all the relevant members of the European Parliament in charge of women on boards file. It calls on the German presidency of the Council to assume its political and institutional responsibility to bring the directive to the Council agenda and to do this utmost to reach a general approach. The signatories cite various data showing that women still make up less than 30% of board members and only 8% of CEOs of the largest listed companies in the European Union. Now, at a global scale, the European Union is gearing up to adopt a major ambitious EU policy, the so-called Gender Action Plan for a more gender equal world, and this should take effect in early November. This will provide a common policy framework for the next 5 years to provide policy coherence through the inclusion of all the sectoral policies, including trade, and through urging all the partners of the European Union to comply with international standards on gender equality and labor rights. So it should be a major tool. The GAP3 will reaffirm the European Union's position as a global leader on gender equality and women's empowerment, and it will place gender equality firmly as a core priority of all our external action through all our policies, through programming, and through promoting a gender transformative and rights-based approach. It addresses new challenges and opportunities linked to the digital transformation and the changes it brings to the world of work, as well as promotes a fair and inclusive green transition that benefits women and men, girls and boys alike. And of course, we will continue to rely on our global partnerships with the United Nations, with all the agencies, as well as with all our partners in international and regional organizations, with local civil society, with international organizations of civil society activists, with grassroots representatives, with partner governments, and last but not least, with the private sector. And to conclude on a positive note, there is always a silver lining on every cloud. Only if we view this challenge as an opportunity to provide a faster spin to our efforts can we succeed, and this we can only do ourselves. Through all the adversities, we must push harder now to establish women firmer in the center of the decision-making mechanisms, make them part of all peace processes and conflict resolution efforts, and we must turn the global political decision machinery on its head to be able to sail into uncharted waters and tackle the 21st century challenges facing our present and the generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mara, for this. You have inspired a lot of comments and questions in the chat box. So we will take those later. I think what you said at the beginning, no action, no progress. And I think that is what we're all about, is to inspire action to make sure that we are making progress on this agenda. And these years of 2,104, that's shocking. So we really need a lot of action here to make sure that we get to the finish line of gender equality and women's empowerment. You also talked about the quotas, and I have a few questions for Irene, because there is some different views on the effectiveness of quota, and but Irene has a lot of experience in working with governments and with the private sector, and has observation on how quotas have been effective. But maybe, Irene, you could also show what is the flip side of it, and why are some people resistant to using quotas?
Well, quota is a dirty word, has been for a long time, and it presumes somehow that quality disappeared. It's absolutely wrong. First of all, in terms of women on boards, as the ambassador said earlier, there is a growing movement in this direction, and I'm just delighted to hear that the European Union is in fact bringing back Viviane Reding's move to have a quota, across all 28 countries that form the union. We did a study, I think in 2012, of 113 women who were appointed to French company boards after their quota was put in place. And what we found was the majority of them were corporate executives, about over 60%. There was a portion of business academics, you know, just like deans of business schools, and then very large company entrepreneurs of very large enterprises. And that's sort of the traditional profile, if you will, of a corporate director. Because I really got so bored with this notion that somehow if you appoint a woman during a quota, that somehow she is not qualified. In fact, in Italy, that has a quota of 33%, this woman in the central bank said to me, you know, now nominations of corporate directors has become professionalized, and they're looking at the men in the same way that women are now being reviewed for board seats. And she felt that corporate governance would improve because of quotas. So in terms of how many countries are doing this, when we first started looking at this in 2004, I think there were about 7 countries that had quotas. Now there are, and I'm going to make sure I have it, 18 countries with quotas for listed companies. And then there's another 24 countries with quotas for state-owned companies. That is where government has a large stake, which is actually, you know, in place in many countries of the world. You're talking at airlines, at utility companies, for instance, you know, mining and so on. So for a total of 42 countries now with quotas for women on boards. In 2020, South Korea now says at least 1 board seat must be held by a woman. And some of you will say, well, 1? Who cares? The numbers in South Korea haven't moved for decades that we've been doing research on women on corporate boards. So this is significant. The other one is Greece, who's now come out of their economic crisis, and they passed recently a quota of 30%. Now, not all quotas are the same. Some have sanctions for non-compliance, like France, and when that is the case, compliance is much higher. So in France, the quota was 40% for all listed companies. The CAC 40, their blue chip companies, have gone way over that. Companies now with over 50% women directors. So it's not just a question of fulfilling the companies now. So one of the accusations against quotas is, well, great, now the numbers have increased on boards, but we still have a pay gap, as Ambassador said before. We still have, you know, the same sex discrimination biases in the workplace. Well, the quota laws were meant to increase the number of women on boards, and it is fairly recent. So they're not going to change corporate culture immediately. It's going to require a more holistic approach, as Ambassador Marinaki said earlier. It doesn't mean that a company doesn't continue all of its gender-focused initiatives. It is another initiative to increase the numbers of women in quotas are needed and why they're moving. You know what they are? They are legal accelerants, you know? They force a demand because it's a law. Who wants to break a law? They are national in scope, which is very important because in the US, we have a lot of groups, hundreds of groups pushing for more women on boards, but there's no national initiatives to comply. And that's the big deal of the law. It's a very good starting point.
Thank you so much, Irene. And we know from the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action about the 30%, because often these quotas are 30%, that only when we get to a certain 30% and above, we'll have the critical mass to be able to evoke real and sustainable change. So that's what we are talking about, and real sustainable change doesn't come immediately, but it requires action, as we also heard from Ambassador Marinaki earlier. So we'll move over to Sam. You are involved, you work for MasterCard, but also involved with the 30% Club. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what the 30% Club does and its chapters around the world. But for the last 10 years, the 30% Club has highlighted that diversity and inclusion further contribute to that all-round board performance and ultimately increase the corporate performance. We've heard a little bit about that already from Mara and from Irene. If you could talk a little bit about that, and what has been your approach in driving change and how you're measuring that success? Anything that you've seen have changed over time? Over to you, Sam.
Sure. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Mara and Irene, for teeing this up. It's really interesting. So if you think about from the 30% Club, we kind of started on 2 points, really. So the first one is that it's simply not right that women should be denied the ability to fulfill their potential at the top of the corporate world. And secondly, we do know, as others have mentioned, that actually boards and companies perform better when they have greater diversity and inclusion at the top. So McKinsey, for example, say that if you have better gender balance, you're 15% more likely to be profitable. And actually, if you have cultural and ethnic diversity, it then pushes up to actually 35% chance of being more profitable as well. So this data is really, really important. And it was this second point that the 30% Club built its campaign on about 10 years ago. And it was a very simple message. We persuaded a few enlightened chairmen and enlightened CEOs that it was good for business to get more women on their board. So it wasn't a mandate at this point. And they in turn persuaded their friends who were the other chairmen and the other CEOs that this is something that they should join. And it's been really successful. When I look at somewhere like the UK, so 10 years ago, we had less than 10% of women directors on the FTSE 350. Just last month, we hit 33%. So that's been pretty good. And actually, if we think about this ability of the people at the top, the chairman and the CEOs, to really kind of work together to encourage each other on this campaign, that's been the core pillar when we've rolled the campaign out around the world. And as you mentioned, we're in a number of countries. We're in the US, in Brazil, in Hong Kong, in Turkey, and so on. But what we'd also done is we'd recognized that you need to kind of go beyond that. So what do we need to do in terms of encouraging other groups to put more pressure on? So there's a couple of groups that we typically work with. So one is the government. So sometimes, governments will have their own initiatives. It could be a mandate. It could be that they are also encouraging businesses to increase diversity as well, and we partner with them. The other group that's been really powerful are the investor groups. So around the world, the 30% Club has built this kind of coalition of investors that believe that this is something that's important. So again, I'll give the example of the UK. So we have BlackRock, we have Legal and General Investment Management, and the investor group in the UK that the 30% Club is working with has $15 trillion of assets under management. And it's a really powerful voice to both stake the case and persuade the companies that they invest in that this is something that they should be doing. So this is like the second pillar is, how do we encourage others to put pressure on business to do the same? And then what you create then is like a pull from the top. So the chairs and the CEOs and the investors and others are saying, we need more women on our boards and in our executive committee. And then sometimes you hear the excuse, but, there are simply not enough women to choose from, to fill these positions that we're supposed to. So I thought, well, okay, let's try and remove that excuse. So what we're doing to create and develop the pipeline. So, and these sometimes they're small things that the 30% Club might be doing on its own, but collectively it can be quite powerful. So we have, for example, an MBA scholarship program for those women that are really kind of pushing to the next level, and a cross-company mentorship program. We have 2,500 women on in the UK. And that means that somebody, for example, from MasterCard could be mentored by someone from British Aerospace. And it does two things, actually. So one is it gives the mentee access to a much wider network than they would normally have, which is great for actually getting your board positions. But it also gives those senior people, the chairs and the CEOs and others that are doing the mentoring, access and exposure to a group of women that are actually capable of fulfilling those positions when they need them as well. So I think those are that's become the three things that we're focused on. It's getting the chairs to do it, combine with others, and then build the pipeline. And in terms of how we measure success, it's really about the numbers, right? So it doesn't matter how good a social media profile the 30% Club has. We look at what's happening at the top companies in the countries that we work in. So in places like the UK and Australia, they've hit that 30% target. In places like the US and Canada and Malaysia, they're inching up. They're in the high 20s. And even if you look at somewhere like Japan, which has got 13%, actually it's doing really well, because 2 or 3 years ago it was at 6%. So we really feel that it's moving in the right direction, even though the numbers are low. But we're also realistic as well. And it was really interesting that, Mara and Irene both talked about the importance of quotas. And actually, we look at some countries, places like Hong Kong, that the 30% Club has been present in for quite a while, and the progress is really slow. So we need to think about, actually, in different environments, do you need a different approach depending on the culture and the specific business environment there. And just to finish off, if I think about what's changed, we started focusing on boards, focusing on boards. One of the things that we've moved to now is looking. The first thing I want to pick up is this idea of 30%. So people often ask us at the 30% Club, why only 30%? Surely we're aiming for parity. And absolutely, that's what we're looking to do. That's the aim. But as you mentioned, Anna, 30% is this the threshold that you need to get real change. And also, it's way easier for someone to sign up to 30% than 50%, because it feels like an achievable target in the medium term. So that's been really powerful as well. But it's strengthening that message that 30% is the floor, not a cap. And actually 50% is what we're really pushing for around the world. The second thing, actually, is if we look at lots of places, you're getting lots of board members. We talked about Italy, we talked about the UK, we talk about France, where you're getting those 30, 40%. But if you look at the number of chairs and CEOs that are women, the numbers are really low. You're looking at 4, 5, 6%. So although you get diversity, a leadership team at the top of an organization, what happens when you look nationally to bring your business leaders together, or globally? If you're looking to CEOs and to chairmen, you're looking at a sea of men. So when you get that cohort together, you don't have the diversity that you should. So that's an important focus for as well. And I love the idea that you have in your principles in terms of getting more women onto board, which is encouraging term limits. Because in the UK, we can see in the next 2 years, we're going to get the turnover about 60 chairmen. So we can call for, actually, why don't we get 30% of those new positions to go to women? We've got lots of directors, lots of people with experience that they can choose from. And so that's a big change. The other big change has been the focus on the C-suite. We've talked about boards. Irene, you mentioned you can bring someone from academia, you can bring someone from consultancy, you can bring someone from law, and you can put them on their boards. But if you look at the executive committee, it's much more difficult. You really need to build the pipeline. So where you find people with 30% of women on boards, you might only find 20% of the executive committee. So we know that's a big area to push on. And the final one is looking at wider diversity as well. So it's really important that a campaign for gender equality doesn't benefit just one particular type of woman in a country. It needs to benefit all women, regardless of race, of social class, of disability, or any other, attribute that effectively doubles the discrimination that a woman might face. And that's something that we're really focused on these days. And we've just included that race in our targets for the UK. So that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Sam. And you were picking up what we also heard from Mara earlier, that diversity is our strength. Thanks for also bringing in the intersectional lens to this conversation, that it's not only about getting white women into the boards, but to get a diverse group of women that can represent the diverse society. And as we've seen also in research, when the board and the leadership is diverse, its diversity is representing its consumers, it most likely will also increase its sales or its profitability as a company. But we'll move over to Anita Bhatia, our Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, to also talk from UN Women's perspective and from your own, Anita. Why is gender parity in decision-making bodies, such as the corporate boards that we're talking about today, so important for achieving gender equality? And why does this need to be a priority of all stakeholders?
Well, thank you very much, Anna, for the question. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Really a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. And really nice to see my old friend Mara, and to see you, Sam, and Irene. Really, really great panel to be on. Just a delightful way to start, well, not start, I started a couple of hours ago, but a delightful way to spend a Friday morning on a really important topic. Let me start first by really just thanking actually our partners. I want to thank you, Mara, and the EU for a fantastic partnership, because I think this collaboration and support that we have enjoyed with you through the We Empower program in the G7 EU and LAC in Asia is really a very critical component of our work, and very important for the topic that we're talking about today, but more broadly for the issue of gender equality. So I really just want to express sincere gratitude and appreciation for the fact that this partnership has allowed us to hold multi-stakeholder dialogues, to reach out, to promote responsible business practices, and to come up with some very practical ways of moving the needle. So many, many thanks for that. And I'd also like to thank the ILO for being such a great partner. And Sam, great to see you, because of course MasterCard is a great partner of ours as well. And the Global Summit of Women, I would also really like to thank for joining us today. So I just feel that we are in this bubble of brilliant partnerships as we start this conversation today. So Anna, you asked a really important question, and I think it's even more important to ask this question, which was important before the pandemic, but has become super important after the pandemic. And of course, we're still living through the pandemic, so we really shouldn't be talking about recovering from it, because we are still sadly in the throes of it, and will be until we have a comprehensive vaccine regimen and treatment available that is accessible to all. So let me start by first just saying a few words about how important gender parity has become, the renewed importance of gender parity. And I think it stems from the fact that the pandemic has a differential impact on women. And we sort of knew that at the beginning of the pandemic, but we have no doubt about it now, no doubt whatsoever. And, you alluded to some of this, Mara, in your brilliant opening remarks, that this differential impact, the way we are seeing it at UN Women, is on 3 areas. And I do want to spend just a minute or so on this before getting to the specific question of parity, because I think it's important to understand this impact in very specific terms. And this impact is in the areas of income, in the areas of health, and in areas of security. And income is impacted for various reasons, because women are disproportionately in the sectors that have been hit by the pandemic: tourism, travel, hospitality. Income, because so many developing countries have large informal sectors that have just ballooned through this crisis. So you have the issue that the poverty was already very feminized, and now it's even more feminized. And our estimates show that as many as 47, maybe 50 million women are going to fall back into poverty in just 1 year, which is 2021. And then, of course, the world is talking about the impending debt crisis. And we know from previous debt crises that women are going to be hammered through this. And so I wanted to flag that there is this very specific impact on women that we can't forget about. And, it starts with the income issue, but then you have the health issue. And again, you might say, we're having a conversation on gender parity. What's this got to do with health? And I'll tell you what it has to do with health, because if you lose access to reproductive health, right, which has happened during the pandemic, you can't really tell a woman who wants an abortion to come back in 6 months, right? You can't really do that. So if she's not able to have access, control over her body, that means it's going to lead to different choices that she makes, and she may not be able to enter the workforce. She may not be a candidate for a seat on a board. So it is really important to not forget the fundamental role of health as well. And then finally, in terms of security, you said this, Mara, but again, important to point out that if you are not safe, you cannot engage productively, which means if you're a victim of abuse, you're not going to work, and you're certainly not going to be a candidate to be on a board. So that's the context that I wanted to lay out. Now coming to the specific issue of gender parity, Irene, thank you so much for sharing all that really interesting data on the numbers and how few countries actually have quotas in place. And Sam, thank you for sharing the experience and the variable experience in different contexts like Hong Kong and others on making progress. From where we sit, a quota is essential. Without some kind of compliance mechanism, there isn't going to be movement, because there is just too much bias in the system. First, the other day, our friend Jane Fraser got appointed to become the first CEO on Wall Street. And, when I was reading this, I have to say my personal reaction was, I can't believe that in 2021, I am reading something which says, first woman CEO on Wall Street. I mean, are we in the 18th century or are we in the 21st century? And so, I think we sometimes tend to lose sight of just how ridiculous the state of gender equality in the world is, just how ridiculous it is, and that we actually think that 30% is an achievement. Do you see what I'm saying, Sam? I mean, 30% is great, but why are we talking about 30%? We should be at a minimum of 50%, and we should be talking about the day when 2 women win the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, and the headlines don't say 2 female scientists win Nobel Prize for Chemistry, right? It should be 2 scientists. But there's so much commentary on the fact that, of the 185 women who have, 185 people who have won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, only 8 thus far have been women. So naturally, the headlines have to say, oh my gosh, we have 2 female scientists who won the chemistry award this year. So from where we sit, the world was not a very good place when it came to gender parity before the pandemic. And the very real danger is that with the pandemic, the state of gender parity is just going to get really much worse. And we are going to find ourselves in a situation that we're going to crawl out of the hole, and that hole has just become very much deeper. So I'll stop there, Anna, but I just wanted to say that we see this as a critical issue. We think that there must be compliance measures, there must be monitoring measures, there must be ways of reviewing this. We have to change recruitment practices, because it's not just about the stock, it's also about the flow of new candidates, and that's your reference, Sam, to the pipeline. And so wonderful, Mara, to hear that there is this push to renew Viviane Reding's proposal, and to really make this a core and fundamental pillar of EU policy. So I think we do have to feel to go into solving this problem in a hopeful way, but with really a very hard-nosed attitude towards recognizing just how deep and structural this problem is. Thanks, and over.
Thank you so much, Anita. And we are getting a lot of questions and comments, and everyone gets inspired by your remarks. But we are moving quickly towards the top of the hour. So I'm going to ask generic questions to the three panelists, and also weave in two questions that we have from the participants. It is about good examples. So I'm just actually looking for Irene. Did she fall out? Because I wanted to call on Irene, but I don't see her. So I wanted to ask a question about good examples of companies which have implemented quotas on corporate boards in the US and Europe over the past 25 years. We'll take that question when I think Irene will be back. But I know also that MasterCard itself, as a chair of the 30% Club, is also doing a lot of good work and to work on the pipeline and the pool of talented women. We had a question for you, Sam, about how women could get ready and prepare themselves for such positions, if you have any recommendations and tips on that. And we'd also like, of course, hear from Anita on what UN Women is doing to advance women in leadership positions, and what are some quick recommendations for our web signatories. I'm wondering where our dear Irene fell out, but there's also a question towards you, Mara, so maybe we'll have time for that in a little bit more on the EU Parliament. But there was also a question, I think inspired by Anita's remarks on the COVID. It seems that there is an excuse now to put legislation on hold because of COVID that could have advanced this agenda. So any reflections on that? But we'll go straight into Sam until we see Irene back online. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Anna. So look, in terms of the way that MasterCard thinks about gender equality, we look to put a lens across the whole of our business. And so that means that we look at what we can do for our people, what we can do for our markets, so the consumers that we serve, and what we can do for society. And I think your point, Anita, that if we look at what's happening during the pandemic, for us, it's been really important when we think of women actually as consumers of our customers, what we can do for them. So we made a commitment during the pandemic to actually extend our financial inclusion goals from what was 500 million people to 1 billion people over the next 5 years. But we also looked at the number of SMEs, micro businesses, that we were going to include, and we set a target there for 50 million. Now, in the natural scheme of things, probably about a third of that engagement would go to women-owned businesses. But because we know women are underserved, we know they're really struggling during the pandemic, we made a specific target that half of those, 50% of the funding and the work that we're doing, is going to go towards women-owned SMEs. And we think that's really important, and particularly to get them working online, accepting digital payments, familiar with cybersecurity and all of those things which you need to be able to trade in a post-pandemic and a pandemic world. So that's been a really great commitment, I think, of ours, and something that other businesses could look to. And we've also looked at what we can do for our people as well. And so when we think about that, is we look at, first of all, looking at gender pay gaps. So what we did, we've done an assessment for every single job across the whole of the world. We're in 200 countries, and to make sure that men and women doing the same jobs are paid equally. And then we looked, and that is, so dollar for dollar, that assessment and that, that has been done. Those adjustments have been made. So we're really happy there. And then we also look at the pay gap. Now, we do have a pay gap in MasterCard, but it's 8% globally. So women are being paid on average, 92 cents for every dollar that the men are earning. But that's a reflection of the fact that the men are in more senior positions. So we know that we need to get more women into senior positions, but we've done the analysis and we're looking to see how we might address it. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at how do we develop our pipeline. So there was a question about how do you get more women on boards. So as a first step, something that's really good is we're looking to match our senior women with not-for-profit boards. It's a really good way of getting your first board position, getting that experience before you can move into a corporate board. So that's an active program we have in the US, and we're looking to roll out into other countries. We also encourage our own women to present to our own board. And Anne, who I know Irene and Anita know quite well, she's offered to mentor each of those women as they're preparing to present to our own board as well, to encourage them to get the best performance that they can. And then we look at the middle layer. So McKinsey have done some research that said, actually, you know, we've got 50% at entry level and then 30% women in senior positions. So what's happening? What's going wrong? And it's at that first management level where there's a fall off. So we've looked at our own data and seen what can we do for women in the middle ranks. And so now we have a mentoring program which has got about 900 women on around the world, because we want them to stay with us, we want them to grow with us, and we want them to help the company grow as well. And then we've also thrown in, you know, unified parental leave for men and women. So when you're looking at an employee as a man or a woman, you're not thinking, oh, they're going to be a mother. You're thinking, no, they're going to be a parent, a man or a woman, and you treat them the same way. And our policies are designed to reflect that. So those are some of the things that we're doing in the business.
Thank you so much, Sam. And welcome back, Irene. We were talking a little bit about good practices. And I know you have a few examples to share. So over to you, Irene. You need to unmute yourself. Great.
You can look at the French companies because they're doing the best. Total, for instance, which is an energy company, has a board that is 58% female. And then other companies there, AXA with 53%, Électricité de France also at 53%. But I like what MasterCard is doing, and it's the kind of developmental approach, coherent approach that's actually needed. You can easily helicopter in women onto boards, but developing a pipeline from the bottom up takes much more effort, and it requires a concentrated commitment, not only on the part of the CEO and senior executives, but everyone, and to be held accountable. One of the companies that I thought did quite well doing this, and they don't have a quota, is Australia. There is a company called Westpac, and they wanted 50% senior women in their leadership. It took them 10 years, and they held everybody accountable from, you know, mid-level supervisors all the way up. And on their 200-year anniversary, and our summit happened to be there at that time, their CEO announced, finally, they reached 50%. And I mention this because it takes that kind of, it took them a decade, and it was something started by a prior, they're sort of unusual that way. And it's something I've not seen in other companies. It's good to set targets. You know, Sam was talking about how the 30% club based in the UK's approached its trying to reach more women on boards. In the UK, Lord Davis was tasked by the government to do a study on, you know, where are we in terms of women leadership, and they saw that their numbers were horrible. So he set a target initially of 25% for the FTSE 100. Well, by a certain year, I think it was 2017, they reached that. Now they set a new target of 30%. They're going to surpass that. Whether it's quotas or targets, you need a goal, a numerical goal, a national numerical goal in order to move the needle. And internally, you have to set that goal at every level. In the US, we're not going to have a national quota. That's not how it works, although we have a quota in California. What has worked is something that Sam had mentioned. I'm part of something called the 30% Coalition funds. California State Pension Fund, Teachers Pension Fund, New York State Pension Fund. This is several. We wrote to companies that didn't have a single woman director and as shareholders. And now over 300 companies, totally driven from the bottom up, now have a woman director. That's how the US works, on the basis of votes. When CalSTRS, CalPERS, or the New York State Pension Fund leader, or if there's no person of color. Pension fund has 1 million shares of ExxonMobil. That's a lot of votes. So I don't care anymore what strategies used, whether it's shareholder-driven, target-driven, quotas, let's use it. The point is to do something. Where we lose is when we do nothing. And so it requires commitment, leadership, persistence, and ongoing trust that somehow women will add to the betterment of our business community. And they will, and they do.
Thank you so much, Irene. And Anita, if you would like to talk a little bit about UN Women's work.
Yes, well, look, the foundation of our work in this area is the Women's Empowerment Principles, because that is a bedrock for our engagement with companies on a range of issues, but particularly on this. And of course, we leverage that to produce knowledge products and think pieces that can be influential. So, we have recently published, for instance, a guidance note on building inclusive boards to achieve gender equality. This is something we share with our company counterparts. We look at good practices. We came across this good practice where, I think it was BNP Paribas Asset Management, where they have said very clearly that they have very strict standards about how many women they need to see on boards before they can approve, certain candidate slates. And so there are these sorts of initiatives. There's also been recently the 2X challenge, which during the recent, at the G7, where there was this focus on financial inclusion that extends to looking at participation on boards as well. And we know that there are a lot of ongoing efforts globally to push this agenda, which we partner around. But I think the key thing is that in addition to the WEP's principles, the WEP's guide, the WEP's action card on gender parity, which we also have disseminated across the globe, we have ways at UN Women to keep up the advocacy and the dialogue, and importantly, the focus on this issue. Because especially now, when policymakers have so many other important, urgent things to worry about, there's a real danger that the issues of gender parity will become secondary because people are busy solving other more systemic problems. So I think just keeping the issue on the agenda is really, really important. And our Generation Equality Forum has an action coalition around feminist leadership and movement. The topic of next year's CSW in March is around women's decision-making and leadership. So we will continue to use these opportunities for advocacy to make sure that this issue doesn't go away. And I want to say one other thing on the stock and flow issue. And Irene, I couldn't agree more that this takes a whole of organization effort, and it's not enough to just have the leadership commitment, because it needs to be cascaded through the organization in order to build that pipeline of talent. I have to tell you, I have often wondered whether recruitment should shift to 75%, 25%, 75% women, 25% men, because it is extraordinary to me to see the funneling that happens. And the funneling that happens where you have 50-50 recruitments, and as you were saying, Sam, by the time you get to the top, that funnel, that inverted funnel has become like this. And somehow, you know, you start equal, but then by the time you get to the top, it looks like this. And you're like, well, wait, but what happened to all the women, right? You hired all these women, and then all along the way, not everybody was off having a baby, right? So there's something else going on here. And that something else is systemic bias. It's lack of mentoring. It's lack of real focus on the issue. So I have wondered, I wonder if we had a radical policy suggestion, which is let's change recruitment and have 75% women. And so then maybe if you have many more women entering, that by the time you funnel, and you know, if you started like this, that maybe by the time you funnel, it'll look like this and not like this. So anyway, just something I've been thinking about. But thanks for the question, Anna, and back to you.
No, thank
and
you
I
so
apologize,
much.
but I'm going to have to ring off very soon. I'm actually a bit late. It's already 10. It's 4:10, and I had a 10 o'clock.
Yeah,
So-
no, it's fine. It's fine, Anita. We are wrapping up. We will just hear the final comment from Mara on the questions on legislation, and then we will run a few poll questions, and then we'll close. So it's fine, Anita. You can jump off if you'd like. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to my fellow panelists who have raised all these important points. I cannot agree more that indeed it should not be 30%, it should be 50% to which we should be aiming for. I don't see the reason why we would compromise on a lower than a full parity number. And also I would like to highlight as a general comment how important to see women in leadership positions also as role models for the younger generation and also for the lower employees in the career ladder. Now, on the new directive, it still awaits a political approval, a political green light to enter the negotiation room and start being discussed. It has not yet had a first reading after 8 years. So this is why it has been put forward as a very strong political request by all the political parties of the European Parliament to the German presidency to be able to take up this political responsibility and use the current timing, which is very opportune in order to introduce for discussion and ultimately for adoption this directive, which would be expected to have also an additional positive ripple effect for gender diversity throughout the career ladder, and would also include positive elements to increase the transparency in appointment procedures beyond, of course, the effect of realizing the principle of equal treatment among men and women by setting a framework for the companies, and also to promote the existing talent pool of both female and male candidates at all levels. So we are confident that there is a political strong wind in the right direction, and we have also promises that have been made at the highest level for making headway on this important file. And we feel that before long we could take it up and indeed mark a new page on the inclusive participation of men and women in the economic sector, in the private sector, but also beyond that. It affects the whole of our societies. Thank you, Anna. Back to you.
No, thank you so much. And we have so many inspiring comments and questions in the comment box, and I'd like to just inform all of the participants that we will respond to them. You can also reach out to us on social media. And I see that everyone is very excited about all the different points that you have raised today, dear panelists. So Anita talked about the building inclusive boards to achieve gender equality. It's available on the webs.org/resources. So here, many of the recommendations that we heard today is in this guidance note, basically because all of our panelists have contributed to the guidance note. So here's some quick wins for you to see what you can do in your organizations and to really drive both the parity on boards, but also the pipeline within companies to achieve parity. We hope that you can answer our 2 poll questions. The first is, after the webinar, how informed are you with the topic of leadership and parity on boards? I think we have enough people. We can close. So yes, I think we have a great group that are informed and well informed. So we have about almost 80%. So thanks everyone. There's always more to be discussed. We always leave feeling that we need more time to resolve these issues. And overall, how satisfied are you with the information that you received today? And I would like to also thank Diana and Alicia for Diana for organizing this event, and Alicia for managing the chat box. And we will certainly get back to all of you, either through social media or by email. And for sure, the session has been recorded, and we will share the recording on our website, webs.org. And I think we want to show the next slide. You see, we have a lot of satisfaction here, and information is always needed, as we always say. Diana, if you can go to the next slide, we'll also just promote our next event, which is on 19 October, which focusing on investing in gender responsive companies that we are collaborating with FinDev Canada in organizing. So we'd like to invite you to that one. And finally, Sam, Irene, Mara, and also Anita, who had to leave, thank you so much for your very valuable contribution to this conversation. And I think it's just a starting point, because when we lose when we do nothing, and no action is no progress. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.